Well, hello. My name is Max7238. Welcome back to Carrier Command 2. I'm making a quick, hopefully quick, follow-up video here. Hold on a second. My camera's a bit odd, and you can see the peanuts on my nightstand back there. Whoops. Um, I'm starting this up pretty quickly. I've actually been at the game for a little while now, trying to get the right circumstances for recording, and things just aren't going my way. Can't check the log. I've been loading and reloading things because I've actually been modifying the game a little bit to make things easier for my subsequent videos, because I would like to be able to run a game where I only use ground units, so I've been trying to modify the files to speed them up in the water just a little bit, so that at the very least I am not wasting my time sitting around waiting for them to deploy, because ideally I'll be modifying, cutting the videos so that you don't have to deal with that if it is something that becomes a problem. Hopefully with the slight modding I've done, it won't be. Their top speeds in the water have roughly doubled, but the AI does not use maximum throttle almost ever. So that is very much on purpose, so I don't want them going ridiculously fast, and if I take direct control of them, I want them to be moving at a decent pace. But there's other things, such as I lost 2 of these needlefish. I did wait around for them to actually get to me, and then I was busy taking care of what was going on here at Vatland, and the Navy, for Magma, started attacking. There were 4 units, and of those 4, I was able to kill 1 with torpedoes just by flinging torpedoes over there to keep them busy, because they had fired 2 torpedoes down here at me, and because I had all of my needlefish in position to refuel, and I didn't react in time because I didn't know that the torpedoes were incoming at all, I lost the 2. But my own subsequent curtain of torpedoes and then a quick Manta strike were able to take them all out, so no more naval units. And on top of that, Magma did also launch all of its air units, but the air units in this game are only really a threat to the carrier, and even then only if they have a bunch of rocket pods. Otherwise, they're basically a non-issue, and anti-air missiles handle them, and that's pretty much exactly what I did. Now, I know that there's more of a navy at Bell Tempest, but I don't plan on dealing with them anytime soon. And as we can see, the AI has taken Lingard, where we spotted them last time. Where they go from there, most likely Dusa, we'll see, but I'm going to be abandoning the save pretty soon, because this was essentially just here for me to be able to go ahead and do all of these demonstrations. So, let's get the advanced thing out of the way first. I want to point out that a barge here is able to carry 200,000 units. I believe those are kilograms, so specifically 200,000 kilos of whatever it happens to be. Now, I mentioned before in the previous video that I did modify the save, and I did, and I do that sort of fairly often, just to give myself whatever sort of booster that I need to get started with a game. We do that with my captain sometimes, because the starting loadout options are very sort of binary, I guess, with the way the developer has them set up. They're either very bare bones basic, or they are good enough, but they don't give you enough of the actual resources to run. For example, the complete loadout, if I remember correctly, gives you 2 rocket pods and then gives you 50 rockets. That is not enough to run 2 sorties with those rocket pods, because each rocket pod takes 19. So I don't think it takes anybody with a math degree to figure out that once you load 2 rocket pods with 19 rockets each, launch, fire all the rockets by, taking out an entire island or sweeping a bunch of naval units, when the unit comes back, it won't be able to fully reload, therefore your rocket pods are not out of commission. I do not like starting games with all blueprints unlocked, even if that means you still have to take territory in order to produce those, and you still have to have the currency to make them. part of the fun of the campaign, to me at least, is figuring out what islands have what, and, you know, figuring out those priorities. Like, for example, part of the reason why I like this particular seed is because Terminus here has rockets and IR missiles. That's great. So if I were able to produce rocket pods, which I can, I believe that was this island, if I'm not mistaken, Outpost was one of the reasons why I took that one before, say, taking up here Obsidian, which, although it has an artillery gun, the artillery gun I mostly just use for turrets, and why use an artillery gun for turrets if I could just spam them with rockets? So I'm pretty sure that's what I was working towards on this save months ago when I made it. So there's that. Now, in modifying those saves, I found some hanging units. The inventory screen has a couple of dummy slots, I think, for things that the AI is capable of using, such as 15mm guns, which the player cannot equip, cannot, operate. So it's pretty close that one of those is 15mm shells or bullets, and the other is the 15mm turret, which the player can't select, and so those are sort of zeroed out. You can't, even if you add them into your save, you're not going to actually get those things to show up in the stock screen, because the stock screen is very well set. So that means, of those 51, you have the 2 dummy slots, suddenly there's 55. So there's 4 extras, and those 4 extras hang at the end of the save file's inventory, inventory section. So I was curious, and I added one of each of those things to a barge, which I was able to find by, for example, looking up. This one has 304 fuel at the time of a save. Okay, so I look for the number 304. I find that in an inventory screen, and okay, so that means now I just go down to the very bottom of the inventory and I change all those zeros into ones. And the weight went up by, what was it? I want to say 300,000. I think it was 300,000 that it went up by. And I was able to look at the difference based on what the barge was already carrying versus what the total weight was. Simple math. So what of 4 of what would equal 300,000? Because that means that each of them has an average weight of 75,000. And the heaviest thing that we have to stock, as far as I'm aware, should be the Manta at 25,000. So something that I was adding in there is 3 times the weight of a Manta. It means one of 2 things. As of the current date, which happens to be June the 4th, 2022, either Geometa is planning on adding some sort of new units or something, or new weapons, and it just happens to be that those 4 things' average weight is 75,000, or that is the weight of the 4 types of needlefish. Because, as you remember, there are 4 types of needlefish: sea whiz, torpedo, gun, missile. And those are definitely bigger and heavier than a Manta. So it would make perfect sense that in order for the game to understand these things and manufacture them correctly, they needed to be added into the inventory, insofar as they could be added to the queue here and then deployed immediately upon their completion, and the only thing that can do that is the warehouse. Makes sense. At least it makes sense to me. So those are the 2 possibilities. Now, I said last time that I was going to do a couple of things, and then I completely forgot to do them. So we're going to do those. And the first one is actually going to be going through this stock screen and talking about all of the different things that are in here, my observations with them, what I recommend you do or do not do with them, so on and so forth. So we're going to start up here at the top with flares. And so the first thing I want you to take note of is that that left side of the screen there has an icon. That icon is what you're going to look for when you're looking at the map screen for figuring out what a particular island can produce. So, like, for example, since this is considered a small munition, if I wanted to look and see if I had flares, I'm looking for, there's that same icon again. So I want to be able to produce rockets, and rockets are considered a large munition. I can't produce rockets here. I don't have them unlocked. We saw that earlier. So I want to go down here and I want to look, okay, there's these 2 icons. Which icon is the rockets? Well, it should be that icon right there. So forward firing rocket, and you have the icon. So That will help you to inform your decisions when taking the islands, and it'll help you figure out what icon is which, because, you know, some of them look fairly similar. So, flares. It says it's an IR countermeasure flare, and it does do that. But the other thing that it does, and since I didn't demonstrate it last time, can I do that from here? I can. I'm just going to go ahead and fire a flare right now, and then I guess we could just hop on the viewing scope because I don't have anything deployed currently. There it goes. So it launches up into the air, and then it gets really, really bright, and it helps to illuminate your surroundings, especially at night or in inclement weather. Mainly used for spotting turrets on islands, because turrets don't have the headlights. So on 3 or 4 shield island, there may be turrets that are deployed in various spots on islands, and if you want to be able to, you know, spot those a lot easier, you can use a flare to do that. But they are also the ammunition, so to speak, for the IR countermeasure attachment that anything with an auxiliary slot can use. So as you can see, IR countermeasures, I have 198 ammunition for whatever that thing is. Well, it just so happens I also have 198 flares. So there we go. The next thing is 20mm ammo. The first thing you'll notice is that says 40K. That's not an exaggeration. I do actually recommend carrying numbers of these in the tens of thousands for reasons I'll get into right now. So first of all, you'll notice that the inventory screen rounds that number, and that number has been rounded because it's kind of a large number. It doesn't fit on the screen. So these, along with any of the other bullet or shell types, all weigh 1. So they are all, for weight purposes and inventory management purposes, created equally all the way up to the 160mm. And that's why I carry so many of them compared to pretty much everything else that you're going to see throughout the rest of this screen. Now, 20mm says chain gun ammunition. It is that, but it is used for a lot of things. It's used for the chain guns on aircraft, but it's also used for all 4 of your CIWS. Now, you'll notice, if you're playing the game in any modern time and you're new to it, that my CIWS says that it has 1,000 rounds in it. I didn't modify that. Very recently, the developers nerfed those CIWS from carrying 1,000 rounds each to 100 rounds each. That's important. And I agree with the change. So what that does is it means that, barring reload times, it's actually possible to run the AI CIWS out of ammo. It's also possible to run enemy players out of ammo if you happen to really be into PvP for this. So what you can do now is you can run CIWS out of ammo, either by, dodging it consistently enough somehow. Good luck with that. CIWS in this game, the AI is no joke. They will absolutely shred you. They're very good. I compare that to like Ace Combat 7 or Ace Combat 6, where you can fly circles around CIWS all day and they'll never stop you. It's the flak that you usually have to worry about in those games. We don't have flak cannons in this game, so the small victories for pilots like me. So 20mm ammo is used in these CIWS, and it's also used in ground-based CIWS and in the aircraft chain guns. Ground-based CIWS, you might think, when you first start out, yes, this is great, I'll just put CIWS on everything, and I can use that to destroy ground units as well because it's so strong. No. Developers thought of that too, and that used to be one of the strategies that the community recommended for quite a while with this game before I started playing. They figured that out, and they kind of went, okay, no, that doesn't, we don't want to allow that. That's way too ridiculously strong. 1,000 rounds that you're able to fire like an aircraft chain gun and use maybe 20 of them to down another ground unit, and the AI will not do that. That's too powerful. So CIWS specifically versus other ground targets does greatly reduce damage to the point that it's negligible. You might as well not even bother. So don't try that manually. Better to just deploy the CIWS and let it do its thing automatically, because the AI will track and fire on air targets much better than you ever will, I promise. They're very good at it. So that is what you use 20mm for. The 100mm is pretty important. It says cannon ammunition, but it doesn't really specify, I think. Okay, so it does give you the difference. So these two say that they're artillery ammunition, but this one says cannon ammunition. That's important, and that's helpful because that means that you can sort of figure out, okay, so the bear's heavy cannon, 100 millimeter, right? Battle cannon, 100 millimeter. Artillery cannon, 120 millimeter. And now, unfortunately, it doesn't tell you how much these load, but I will when we get there. So 100 millimeter is used for your, like heavy assault, like these are your tank shells, so to speak. And then these would be your howitzer shells, your artillery ammunition. And these can be controlled manually. The battle cannon and heavy cannon can be controlled manually, and they're very, very good, especially in the hands of a player. The AI can pull off some pretty strange things once in a while with a heavy cannon, but there are positives and negatives to using each one, and we'll get into that. The 160 millimeter is only used by the carrier gun and the Needlefish. So I now have this fleet out here with me. Some of them do have access to a 160 millimeter gun. They will use my ammunition, and the ammunition that they reload is 160 millimeter. So effectively having more of those things with you is like increasing your magazine size, because the carrier in and of itself carries 20 shells. It loads 20 shells at a time, and those shells take a long time to reload. Also, each of them is quite expensive and takes a long time to manufacture, so don't use these on one-shield islands to club seals, so to speak. You're going to want to save that for taking out convoys or very high-priority targets, perhaps something that is suddenly an immediate threat to a convoy or another unit of yours, and they arrive much more quickly than ground artillery will, than the 120 millimeter. They're very, very strong. You want to make sure if you're going to engage an enemy carrier that you have given this gun time enough to reload, because one of the best ways to kill an enemy carrier is actually to get your helmsman, if you're not the helmsman, to ram into the enemy carrier and then hop on this scope here and use that 160 millimeter gun at super close range to just keep pulling the trigger and dump all 20 shells into that enemy carrier, and you will watch them evaporate. There's very little that they can do to stop you at that point if you can get that close. It's an extremely powerful gun. Now, Sonic Pulse. Sonic Pulse ammunition is for specifically the Sonic Pulse generator. Wow, go figure. But the thing is, the Sonic Pulse ammo and the generator itself will not be triggered by AI. You have to use them manually. So keep that in mind if you ever mount them on a unit. They're very powerful. I'll explain what they do. But they cannot be used by AI. I'm saying that first so that I make sure that this is emphasized. I don't want anybody to make this mistake. A Sonic Pulse generator detonates all explosives in a given area. It's roughly 200 meters. It's fairly wide. It's pretty good. So what that effectively means is if an enemy has fired an IR missile at one of your units, or if there's an artillery shell incoming and you know that somehow, all of those things are destroyed by Sonic Pulse. Anti-air missiles, IR missiles, rockets, doesn't matter. Anything explosive gets triggered as if it struck a solid surface. And that can be very useful, and it's pretty important. Especially, I would assume, for PvP. Again, not really my thing, but if I was going to play a PvP game, I would have a Sonic Pulse generator on pretty much every unit that I run. Because, typically another player is going to try and use some kind of guided munitions to take out your units, because that's just, the easiest way to do that, especially for an air unit firing a bunch of anti-air missiles. So having not only IR countermeasures, but also a Sonic Pulse generator would be fantastic to handle that. Smoke ammo is split between two different types of smoke emitters. One is explosive, one is stream. Either way, it takes quite a bit of smoke to fool the AI, and a player is probably not going to be fooled by smoke all that well. Now, the thing is, as far as I've heard it, I haven't had a chance to test it. I would like to test it in some of my subsequent videos. But as I've heard from other people, 2 explosive smoke rounds will mask you from the AI. So maybe you'll try that out yourself, or you can wait for me to try it out in a subsequent video. I definitely want to get through to that. 30 and 40 millimeter ammunition is pretty self-explanatory. They're only used in the 30 and 40 millimeter turrets, which are equipped onto Seals and Walrus. You're only going to use the 30 millimeter gun until you can replace it with literally any other weapon, and the 40 millimeter is actually pretty good. Personally, it is my favorite weapon to use on a ground unit. Unfortunately, since it can only be equipped on as much as a Walrus, and a Walrus is still not a match for a bear, it's still not the greatest weapon in the world. It's good to have as like a backup, or to send in to, you know, maybe take out like a 1 shield island, 1 and 2 shields. You could send in a couple of like 40mm wielding walrus to do the job, and they'd do it pretty well. But you always have better options. Again, it's one of the reasons why I say the game is very unbalanced right now, and I would love to see the game sort of take on a different shape with even just a few small balance changes. I'm not going to get into that here. Not here to be an armchair developer at the moment. So then we have light, medium, and heavy bombs. These are all unguided bombs, and again, more recent changes mean that CWIS will no longer shoot down bombs, so they have more of a use. Light bombs have a smaller blast radius than the other two. They also weigh half as much as an IR missile, while doing more damage than an IR missile. So these weigh about as much as, if I remember correctly, 10 rockets, and they do a little bit more damage than a torpedo. Since 1 torpedo is enough to take out a needlefish, you can drop 1 of these on a needlefish, and if you get a direct hit, you wipe out the needlefish. No problem. Obviously, that means that they'll also take out any small ground unit, up to and including a bear. They will not take out turrets, though. Turrets require a little bit more firepower than that. They're pretty tough. Medium bombs, then, of course, weigh twice as much as an IR missile. They do more damage than 2 torpedoes, so one of these will down a swordfish with a single bomb. Again, very useful if you can get used to manual bombing runs. And then heavy bombs are kind of overkill on anything other than the enemy carrier. As you see, they weigh 2,000 kilos. That should be the same as a cruise missile, and they feel like they're as powerful as a cruise missile. They have a huge blast radius, they're very strong, but they really, like I said, it's kind of overkill on anything that isn't the enemy carrier, and at that point, you have better options, like the rocket pods. So you can use them. I have gained some better respect for them, but the main problem with using all 3 of these bombs is that the AI is terrible with them. Pretty typically, they will fire one of these bombs, they'll drop one of these bombs on a target as you order them to do so, and that bomb will land anywhere between like 100 to 500 meters off target. They're absolutely horrible. I do not recommend doing that at all. Bombs should be strictly used for player controlled units. Now, you might think this is a bit strange, but I do actually recommend that if you have a spare petrol, and you want something good multi-roll, you can do what I've done here and just give it a little bit of everything, which I do like to do, but something that I've done in the past in a less than ideal situation where I can't produce all of these different items like on demand and I have a big store of them, is you can arm a petrol with some bombs. And the petrol, by nature of the fact that it is a rotary, it's much more stable, so it's a lot easier to aim and drop your bombs with good accuracy, and to get, pretty close to do it as well. Petrols are relatively tanky, honestly, which is very helpful. So, between petrols and albatross and manta, I would probably recommend those for bombs. If you are using razor bills, again, you have better options like chain guns. Razor bills with chain guns are terrifying. IR missiles is infrared tracking missiles, and in the previous video we had some really good luck with them, but I promise you they're not really the best option that you have. Now, one of the things that you'll probably do early starting out is load razor bills or petrols with a bunch of them, like this. And I specifically didn't change this, excuse me, so that I could show this. This is something that we did fairly often, is we would have 2 petrols that had this exact loadout, and we would set it up so that they would fly out and, fire 2 at one target, fire 2 at another target, and then return and reload, and then go out and do it again. And that was one of the ways that we used to clear islands previously, when we were mostly doing things automatic. Until we figured out, number one, that you could control not only the unit itself, but also its weapons at the same time. And then we also, started testing other weapons as we unlocked them and found that there were much better options. So if you're going to use IR missiles, I recommend using them in an IR missile turret mounted on a vehicle. And even then, I have seen one of these an IR-mounted walrus bobbing out in the ocean behind the carrier, fire an IR missile, for that IR missile to turn right back around and hit the target and hit the unit that fired the missile. That has happened twice, and strange that it's happened more than once, right? That would be because IR missiles kind of tend to just fire off in a given direction and then pick the first thing in that direction to attack. So if you fire them and you don't, number one, maintain constant, visual of your target, then it is very possible that those missiles will just kind of go off and do their own thing and strike targets. We've had IR missiles actually kill units we didn't even know were there, because we hadn't fully scanned the island yet. We tried to fire IR missiles because we saw a bear off by itself, and the missiles went clear over the bear and struck something else and blew it up. They're very strange, very unreliable. Laser-guided missiles do the same damage, weigh exactly the same, but these are much more reliable in that you can control exactly where they go. If you're willing to stare down your target because your target is moving, then you can guide a missile directly onto whatever it is. And since they do the same damage, it takes 2 laser-guided missiles to down pretty much any land unit. So those could be pretty useful, and generally we keep a decent store of them because, as I've said before, the guy that I play this game with really likes to add them onto Albatross, so that we use the gimbal camera to scan for targets, and then if there's anything isolated, we use the laser-guided missiles to take those out, while we have other options for convoys, or for air units and that sort of thing. Anti-air missiles, so pretty self-explanatory, and you should carry a lot of them, because not only will they be used in your air units for taking out enemy air units, but they will also be used here in your anti-air missile turrets, and I promise you, you will really want to be able to just walk over here and hit a button and have those things launch and not even question how many of them you have. Could you, shorten the stock by about half? Yeah, you probably could. You carry probably 50 anti-air missiles would be okay if you're hurting for weight somewhere, but if you look up in it's reversed for me. If you look up in the top right, then you're going to notice that I'm at roughly, 92%. You can see the exact value in the right, and then you can see over in the top left the percentage, and that's not by accident. I'm one of those weird people that likes to do cut it out, you. My dog. I'm one of those people that likes to do math for fun. So I sat down one day and I basically budgeted out the weight limit for the carrier to account for all of this stuff. So we have cruise missiles next. If you want to carry more cruise missiles, this would be one of those places where you may want to reduce your anti-air missile ammo so that you can carry more of these things. These are very powerful. As I mentioned earlier, with heavy bombs, they have a big blast radius, and like laser-guided missiles, they can be pinpoint accurate as long as you're willing to stare down your target. Now, I do want to demonstrate, and I can actually do that just from right here. I don't have a target, but I'm not going to actually try and destroy anything. Let's see, so we want to look over at the shore there on Vatland. So, say that you can see an enemy airfield like this one. One of the things that you can do to take those out is you can launch a carrier missile. So we'll wait for the there. Now you can see on the left side of the screen, MSL and then the number of meters reducing. That is the distance to the target for the missile that you fired. Now if you want, you can change where it's going, and you can see the distance changing as I move my camera around, and the missile will actually redirect itself to go to where you're telling it to go. So if you want it to go there and you're sure that it's going there and the target isn't moving, you can cancel support. And wherever you were last looking, that's where that missile's going to go. But look at how slow it falls. That thing is very, very vulnerable to CWIS fire. So if you haven't taken out CWIS around your target, you're not going to be hitting it with any carrier cruise missiles, no matter how strong they might be. Now again, as I mentioned earlier, you can use that scope to fire those guns in super close range with the enemy carrier. So if your helmsman, or you, can ram the enemy carrier, number one, you'll get the achievement for it, but number two, you will then have carte blanche to fire 160mm rounds and carrier cruise missiles at pretty much point-blank range. And they don't have enough of a blast radius to hurt you, but they'll definitely hurt the enemy carrier. Now we have rockets. At the moment, pretty much the most powerful weapon in the game. As you see, 50 kilos. Very light. I want to say it's 20 of them is a single IR missile, if I remember correctly. So that means you can carry a lot of these things, and you can deploy them very often. I like to, for obvious reasons. Each of them does about the damage of an IR missile, and you can carry 19 of them per rocket pod that you strap onto a unit. So when I want a good multi-role attacker, typically I would have a Manta with a chain gun for self-defense, an anti-air missile for emergencies to take out another air unit that may be threatening my carrier, maybe threatening another unit, maybe attempting to threaten the Manta, as laughable as that might be, and then 2 rocket pods for taking out naval units. And then I previously used to run an anti-air Manta specifically. I don't do this anymore, but I did want to at least show it that this is also something that we used to do in the past. And the chain guns are actually no joke. We've had this exact loadout in A8 here save us multiple times. We had a swordfish, an enemy swordfish, close with the carrier that we hadn't noticed while we were doing a landing operation. Both of us were, nose down in the vehicle control screen over there, so nobody was looking at the radar, and all of a sudden we hear explosions because this thing has opened up with its main gun coming straight at us, and we managed to, dodge around. It blew past us, started going in the opposite direction around the island. We launched A8 because that was the only thing that we had that was, loaded and undamaged at the time, and with just the chain guns I was able to take out the swordfish. But it was a near thing, and I don't really recommend doing that, but to illustrate that it's possible in a pinch, chain guns on a Manta can be pretty good for fast attack. Now, Mantas are less stable, so if you're going to be doing gun runs on ground units, you may want to load your 20mm onto an Albatross. It's a lot easier to aim, but the Albatross isn't going to be dodging anti-air missiles and whatnot very reliably anytime soon. They handle like a bus. So rockets, very powerful. Torpedoes, pretty self-explanatory. I demonstrated them in the last video. Speaking of which, we're getting pretty on in time. TV-guided missiles, again, self-explanatory. Now, here's the problem that I have with these things. Look at their weight. They weigh 2,000 kilos. That's the same as a carrier cruise missile. They do not do the damage of a carrier cruise missile. They do the damage of an IR missile. The only quote-unquote added benefit is that you can manually control them, but there's no use for that. Sure, technically, you may be able to, oh, hey, there's a unit, an enemy unit with Sea-Wiz that's up on a cliff. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to, launch a Razor Bill carrying a TV-guided missile, and then I'm going to fire that TV-guided missile and stay, 20 to 30 meters off the ground underneath the Sea-Wiz's firing angle, and then try to, zip up over the, over the cliff and damage or destroy the Sea-Wiz. You could do that, or you could drop bombs from high altitude outside the Sea-Wiz's range. You could use ground artillery to take them out. You could use the 160mm to take them out. You could use rockets to take them out, because rockets are high velocity and won't get shot down by Sea-Wiz. You could send in ground units to take them out. There's so many other options that you have that are so much more weight efficient than using a TV-guided missile for anything, that at the moment they're in a terrible spot, and I don't recommend even carrying them. I have the 2 of them here because I wanted to have the option to demonstrate them just in case I thought that was necessary. So, next we have noisemaker torpedoes. Now I'm going to go ahead and fire one of these off, actually, since I've already got a couple of them loaded, just to show you what exactly that looks like. And knowing where I am, I would actually like to fire them this way, and we'll fire off the left side. And now you'll see I have 40 seconds on the timer, and here it is. So it's been fired off the side of the carrier, and it's on that 40-second timer. Now here's the thing. It's only going to distract torpedoes for that 40 seconds. Once that timer runs out, it's going to dissipate. And we don't have the same problem as the enemy does. So what we can do is we can just sit here and pump that up and fire a noisemaker with a ridiculously long fuse, and that thing is going to last that much time if it doesn't make landfall, which, you know, I'm not terribly worried about it. But to illustrate, you know, so this way you can see that these torpedoes, these noisemakers, are much better used with a very, very, very long timer. There's no reason to fire them with a short timer at all. I see the fleet is kind of drifting, or the carrier is drifting somehow. Drifting closer to the island. That's odd. I think I noticed that it was a bit out of position earlier, but probably gonna bonk some of our friends here, but that's okay. They can take it. I'm going to get back in here because I have all of them surrounding the carrier because they have a certain range at which they can refuel. So we want to make sure we stay in that range for them as long as I have them ordered into this formation so that when I am ready, I can do the demonstration, because that's another section of the video that I wanted to include. Okay. So we should have weapons on, yep, so that'll control my speed pretty well. So we're just going to go ahead and slip on in here. Alright, there we go. And, how are these other newbies doing? They're doing pretty good. Okay, so everybody's here. Yeah, that's what I was looking for. Generally speaking, just as a quick aside, I do tend to have them pull in on one of the vertices that you see here for the boundary. Just makes it easier to keep track of how many of them are here and where they are and all that sort of thing. So we'll get to them shortly. So you've seen noisemakers now. Now, countermeasures, as you can see, blind nearby torpedoes. That's a different thing. So a noisemaker will pull an enemy torpedo off course as long as the noisemaker enters the enemy locking angle, which is roughly 25 degrees in front of the bearing of the torpedo. The countermeasure, which you launch from up here, I'm not going to actually use any of them. I can't really demonstrate them, unfortunately, without, you know, being under fire. But you hit this button, and your carrier will drop a countermeasure into the water. I can't remember exactly where the countermeasure launcher is. I want to say it's either at the back of the ship or it's like somewhere over here. But essentially what that does is it removes the ability for torpedoes in range to lock on. It's not a very big range. The main use of a countermeasure is if you know you're about to be hit by a torpedo and you think you've got enough time, if you get used to it, you can drop the countermeasure, run over to your helm, hit full throttle, like, you know, toggle off weapons, and dodge an incoming torpedo. We've done it a couple of times. It's kind of a last-ditch effort. You don't really want the enemy firing torpedoes at you in the first place. And if they are, you want to be paying well enough attention that you can use noisemakers to handle them, not countermeasures. Countermeasures are a stopgap. They are, you know, you're about to take, you know, what you think is going to be fatal damage, or you're about to lose a component that's already damaged, and you cannot afford anything else, so you're going to make a desperate attempt to dodge. You drop the countermeasure, and you hit the full throttle, and, you know, pray. So we already covered 30mm turrets before. Those are pretty much the thing that you want to replace as soon as possible. We have 20mm autocannons. Those are mounted specifically on aircraft. They're very strong, and I believe they hold 200 or 300 rounds. I think I can actually go ahead and launch one of the petrol just to check the amount of ammunition. So we'll just hit that button and we'll go back to it, and we'll check in with that petrol in a little bit, because I want to be accurate about that. Rocket pods, again, strongest weapon you've got in the game right now, and holds 19 rockets. Actually tells you, which is appreciated. The Sea-Whiz turret targets missiles and air vehicles, just like it says on the tin, and it is mounted on surface chassis. IR missile turret, same thing, mounted only on surface chassis, holds 4 IR missiles. The flare launcher is for your... God dang it, hold on a second. I want to make sure that we're not interrupting anybody's privacy just in case he says something embarrassing, because the poor guy does not deserve to be embarrassed on YouTube. Not right now, anyway. Maybe later. So anti-missile flares, again, exactly like it says on the tin. I even used some of them in the previous video. These will be triggered automatically by the AI in the event that there is a missile incoming. They're not... it's not a sure thing that they will, divert an enemy missile, but they have a pretty good choice, and they load 12 flares at a time, and they fire 4 of them in a burst. So you've only got 3 uses, versus the sonic pulse generator only having 1, which, again, not the best, but we'll get to that when we get there. Battle cannon. The 100mm battle cannon carries 40 rounds of 100mm ammo, and it says that it has a maximum range of 1,000 meters. If you're pretty good with them, and actually, I'll go ahead and launch one of those as well, just for the further demonstration. Here we'll specifically use the battle cannon and the heavy cannon, and we can check in with the petrol. 400. Okay, so I was wrong. It's 400 rounds. It's 400 rounds of 400 rounds of doing this. Very, very powerful. Now, rotaries, as you may notice, once he goes back, because I hit the throttle a little bit, one of the things that you'll notice is that these things try to hover at 400 meters as long as they don't have any orders. That could be very helpful. We'll go ahead and order that thing back. So, next we have the heavy cannon. Carries 12 rounds, and this thing has a much greater range. It says, again, that it has 1,600 meters. This thing fires much straighter and takes much longer to reload. So I'm just going to go ahead and fire that off into the distance, and that circular thing that you see there is it reloading. And it takes all this time for it to fire another round, but it can fire them very far, it can lob them over obstacles, all sorts of things. So it can be very useful for that, and of course you have a zoom feature. And the AI will employ these as well. So we can order that back. Then we have the battle cannon bear, which says it has a range of 1,000 meters. Not entirely true. Again, you can arc the shots. This is more of a close-range weapon, and as you'll see, it carries 40 rounds, and it reloads much faster. It takes like roughly a third of the time, if not like a fourth of the time, to fire off these rounds. So very, very powerful, very useful. Incidentally, you can, if you're interested, actually watch these things come around and re-enter the carrier and whatnot, and you can stay in the gun camera all the way until they're docked in the bay, and then another player can walk down there and you can actually see them from the gun camera. But just to demonstrate the difference between the battle cannon and the heavy cannon, because one of them is mostly for closer range, faster fire rate, that sort of thing. The other is for longer range, lower fire rate. You can, fling shells halfway across an island with this thing. It's pretty good, especially if you got practice with it. Now, the 120mm, it specifically says, and they're not joking, remotely operated. You cannot manually control the artillery gun. You used to be able to, and players were using it as a direct fire weapon. Again, not exactly what I would call balanced, so they made that change. 40mm guns, once again, your replacement for 30mm, pretty darn good. They have a faster fire rate, and they deal more damage than 30mm. Very, very powerful. Most of the time you're going to run into these on enemy turret emplacements, especially the ones that are just kind of sitting out on a hill that you didn't notice until they're busy ripping one of your units in half. And they're pretty strong. They're still not really a match for a bear with a battle cannon or a heavy cannon, but pretty much anything else less powerful than a bear, a 40mm gun can take care of pretty quickly. So now we get into these. These are your auxiliaries, utility items. The observation camera and the gimbal camera serve the same function. They can both lock enemy targets, scan them, give you what kind of unit it is, what kind of weapon it might be carrying. Especially again with that UI mod, you'll get some more accurate readouts, and they can call in support. Now, you're pretty much never going to use observation cameras. I never do. I'm just carrying some of them in the event that I needed to demonstrate them. I don't feel like that's necessary. Gimbal cameras are your go-to. I generally carry 8 of them, and I usually have all 8 of my air units ready to be mounted with them at any given time. The only thing that can't is a razor bill, and I just had one up here again on the off chance that I felt it was necessary to demonstrate their usage, which I still might when we get to the different chassis. Actuated cameras cannot do any of those things. An actuated camera is pretty much strictly for a player to get eyes on a situation where, say, for example, you have an artillery bear and you don't have access to the flare launchers here, so you can't put enough countermeasures on there for it to matter, and you want to just put on an actuated camera that's more of a novelty than anything. They can mark targets just like other weapons can mark targets, but they cannot scan targets and they can't call in support. It's strictly an auxiliary. You have the radar, AWACS, just like it says, detects air and sea vehicles within 10,000 meters, and that can be very, very powerful. If you stuck around for the end of the last video, you could see that the Manta is able to carry these, and it does a pretty good job. Makes it a fantastic long-range scout. Fuel tanks I'm kind of up in the air with. So the wiki says that these things add 100 units of fuel to something. And then another player has told me no, they double the fuel capacity of a given unit. I don't have any on me, so I can't debunk what they've told me at the moment. However, something that the wiki does also say is the fuel capacity for given units. Now, you can go ahead and try this yourself, especially if you start a new campaign, but I've done this before. If you decide you're going to equip an external fuel tank onto a Manta, and you do so while the Manta is fully fueled, then you would assume, correctly, that only that extra fuel tank has to be filled up, and you'll only get a small percentage of the fuel suddenly ticked off of the maximum percentage. If you do the math, you can figure out how much those fuel tanks are worth, and I can tell you it's not double fuel capacity. If it was, then a single Manta loaded with 4 of those fuel tanks would be able to cross the entire map and make it back all in one go. They're pretty fuel efficient, they carry a lot of fuel. That's not the case. Also, in an emergency, those fuel tanks can be dropped like bombs. What equivalent bomb they are, I never bothered to test, because we were doing that back when I had no respect for bombs, and now I have no respect for fuel tanks, so we're probably never going to test that. Radar, exact same thing as AWACS. You can stick it on a ground vehicle, and it will serve the same function. Now, ordinarily, I wouldn't recommend doing that. However, somebody, somewhere, did point out to me, or did point out in general, not to me specifically, that you could do that, and you could leave a seal on an island. Now, why would you do that? Well, if you have done your due diligence, then a given island doesn't have any turrets on it. It doesn't have any units left on it because you've cleared it out. You wanted extra money, you wanted the safe passage for your virus bots to get in there and capture the island, so you cleaned out the island completely. But you can't deploy, I can't select this command center and then tell it to manufacture a couple of like defensive units or a couple of turrets and have them placed on the map. Maybe we'll get that with mod support, maybe the devs will add that someday, not entirely sure. But at the moment, none of that stuff's possible. So, if you don't have a turret left over, like this island over here where I still have a turret that survived, you have no early warning for if an enemy is going to attempt to capture an island. But if you left a seal out there that happened to have the radar pod, which I'm just going to do, because it seems like it'll be funny, and I'm going to be abandoning this save anyway, and yes, I know the seal is not fully repaired. Like I said, don't particularly care. It shouldn't run into any opposition anyway, but just for the purposes of demonstration, that means I can throw this thing out there, and it's got access to the radar unit now, and it's just going to kind of go and make its way. Should also see the speed on it is relatively high compared to what these units usually have. It should be roughly double what they normally move in the water, and that's because I've been fiddling with the files a little bit. Less because I don't have patience, and more because when the game comes to a grinding halt because you've deployed a ground unit and you have to wait 30 years for it to make landfall, it is not exactly what I would call fun. So there he goes. He's going to head out there, and he is going to carry that radar, and even though he has only got a couple hit points, it's still going to be very useful, especially if I can send him over to the target and get him to hide, say, in the hangar bay, or I'm actually sending him over right now to check and see if they have a garage, because some of these bases do have a little garage that units can sort of hide inside. It's not a very mountainous island, so there shouldn't be any like big ramps that I can hide them underneath and stick them up against a wall to hide the headlights, which in PvP would probably be very helpful. But in PvE doesn't necessarily matter. I'm pretty sure they just automatically detect units. So we're going to send him out there and do exactly that, and then we can go ahead and replace this with another walrus. And I don't think I have a 40mm, so we're just going to go ahead and do that and leave that to do its thing. So, one potential use. Now we get to these things, which are other auxiliaries that you can equip. Sonic Pulse Generator, as I mentioned earlier, will not be triggered by AI, carries one Sonic Pulse charge, and detonates all explosives in a given area, very close range, and has to be manually activated. They can be very powerful given the right situation, but they're sort of a last resort kind of thing. There are two types of smoke, stream and explosive. A stream launcher you will trigger, and it will leave a trail of smoke behind you as you move, or it will just constantly puff smoke around you if you hold still. And the explosive smoke launcher, you drop one charge and it explodes, and there you go. I can't remember exactly how many rounds they hold, but I do have some smoke rounds, and I do have some units that don't have any auxiliary on them, so I'm going to go ahead and load one of each of those, and we'll see. Actually, I can just load the one for now, and we'll see where we end up, and then we'll load the other. Makes the math easier. Virus modules, pretty self-explanatory. These are how you capture islands. You do exactly as I've done over here with our seal, and you get them to get close to the target. You do generally want them to be as close to the target as possible, and then there would be another option here in this menu when selecting a waypoint for deploy vehicle, and that would be for deploying the virus bots. And that's how you capture an island, just in case, for whatever reason, you haven't been able to figure that out. But I'm pretty sure that the game does a decent job of teaching that. So, okay, so it carries 16 rounds, because we've got this thing set up and ready to go. And I'll actually just go ahead and load the other launcher on there, and then we can throw this thing out into the water and see how it does. Oh. That carries a lot less than 16 rounds in the stream launcher. Okay, that's interesting. I wonder what the reload time is. I've actually never given them a practical test before. Seals, again, self-explanatory. They're light, they're faster in the water. Like, we're going to speak vanilla here, not modified. I'm not going to talk about how I've done that. Want to make sure that I have accurate information here. The seals are roughly the same speed as bears in the water, and they're also roughly the same speed on land. On land, the walrus is faster on a straightaway. It is slower in the water, and these are, pretty light on armor and on health. They cannot take much of a beating. Walrus is generally much better. Says all-purpose, definitely means it. Armor as a value is a very important value, and this thing has 20 of it versus the bear having 40. For example, a petrel has 4, but the albatross has 0, and the manta has 4, but the manta has less health than a petrel, and it also still feels like the petrel is more tanky than the manta is. I've used a 20mm chain gun before on a enemy manta, and it took me forever to to actually get the shot lined up, because it was flying in a very strange pattern trying to get behind me. And this isn't a flight simulator game, so they were definitely not dogfighting. It was sort of doing this weird corkscrew through the air. That was super strange. And I had to eventually figure out how it was doing that, and then match it, and then very slowly catch up to it and shoot it down. But it went down pretty quickly. In contrast, I've had an enemy petrel kind of just floating in the air going towards something, and that thing can't corkscrew. So since it didn't have any way to like dodge me, I had to make several passes at it because it's so much slower than the Manta is, even at lower throttle. And it took me several passes of just laying into the trigger and getting hits to actually kill the petrel. So, despite the fact that they have the same armor value, I definitely think that there's some discrepancy there. Incidentally, that does also cover the different chassis. Albatross handles like a bus in midair. They are, as a result, very stable, so it's easy to aim and fire with them, and they're more predictable, whereas the Manta is much more maneuverable, much faster, does make it more difficult to control, so do be careful with that. Also, this is a bit strange, and it's also a bit inconsistent, but I have seen a Manta survive a quick touch of the water. It's happened to me a couple of times where I've pulled out of a bombing run just a little bit too late, and I have like clipped the top of a wave or something, and the Manta has not died from that. I don't recommend trying to test that. The Manta cannot land on the water. It will explode. It's just something that may happen once in a while, so if it happens to you, don't be surprised. It will disrupt your flight pattern a little bit. It'll kind of jitter the craft. So if you're already trying to pull up, stay focused, keep trying to pull up, and you'll make it out. Razorbills and petrels are rotaries, the Razorbill being the light, petrel being the heavy, and the Razorbill can carry countermeasures, just like the Manta can, but the Albatross and the petrel cannot. Razorbills are very fast, they're very agile, they can dodge anti-air missiles. I've done it. I was actually able to dodge, I think, like 4 in a row while chasing the enemy carrier in a Razorbill. It was hilarious. But they can only carry 2 armaments. So they're generally light on firepower, and they are very fuel inefficient. They will run out of fuel very quickly, so keep a close eye on them. Use them for rapid attack orders, and then have them return to reload. Petrels, on the other hand, can stay in the air for much longer, and as you see, they are capable of airlifting units. Now, I am going to set up waypoints for this, but I'm not actually going to have this play out. Just as a demonstration, I give it a waypoint, and then I have to drag from the waypoint out to it, and as you see, it has a little hook, and that line is turned green. That means that petrel is going to go out there and try to pick that thing up. And then you can also, from that exact same thing, sit down and give it an order to deploy a vehicle on a different waypoint, and then you pull it off, give it a waypoint there, and then before it's picked it up, you can even give it another pickup order from that waypoint. Now, if I were to let this play out, that petrel will launch, get to this point, recognize the order, move in, pick up the seal, fly it over, deposit it here, wait here for the go code, and when I gave it the go code, it would pick the seal back up. And then I could give it a return home order if I really wanted to. I don't want to do any of that, but unfortunately, there's not really a very reliable way to cancel most of that. So the only other thing I could do is wait for it to launch and drag directly from it back here to cancel those orders. But petrels can airlift units. It's one of their main uses. It's very helpful, and without doing all the crazy nonsense to mod the game, either manually like I have, or downloading a mod from the workshop to increase ground unit speed in the water, you're going to want petrels to be airlifting your units and dropping them off. It's a lot faster, and so you can clear out an entire island of units and then just have one petrel drop one virus bot seal and bring it back, and you're done. Will drastically speed up island captures. And then finally we have fuel. ordinarily I'm budgeted for 1,000, but I modified 1,000 into the save file, and I already had 1,000 in production, so I just received all of it and said screw it. But that's everything. So that's that. Now, before we wrap up another hour-long video, what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how to create a formation with your naval units, just to wrap that up. But we're also going to go in here together and check out whether or not this place has a garage like I think they do. Because it's a 3-shield island, so it wouldn't surprise me. And it's usually pretty close to the target, right around here. But it looks like we're not going to run into any such luck this time. So without a garage to hide in, like I would really want, the other thing that you would want to do is have it hide in the hangar, which I think I can just give it an order for, yep. And so it'll go around the back of the hangar and hang out in there. So I just wanted to go ahead and check on that real quick. But so that's a thing that somebody else pointed out, and I do agree that's kind of a clever idea, especially for PvP, to just kind of hide one of these things somewhere on an island with radar on it as your early response or your early warning system. So now, as you can see, I have a bunch of different types of needlefish out here, and one of the ones that you will not see out here are torpedo needlefish. That's because they're completely useless. Don't at me. No, seriously, they have 2 torpedoes that they can load in their torpedo pods. They cannot launch noisemakers, so if you're going to use them for anti-ship combat, they are actually worse than using your own carrier because they have a set timer of 60 seconds, just like having an air unit drop a torpedo. And although they can aim pretty well, actually no, I think they do automatically determine their timers. So like they're not terrible, but you're just better off being better with torpedoes on your own, and using your own torpedo ammunition on your own carrier. They can reload and fire torpedoes much faster than the carrier can, and we've done that before. But if you would like to see what the game looks like when it runs at 4 frames per second, launch 60 torpedoes out of a torpedo needlefish, because that's pretty much what you're going to end up doing there. So we're going to start moving these things into a formation that I would recommend. And we're going to do that by showing off the following orders from last time. So ideally, and I've only like briefly thought of this, ideally what's going to happen is you're going to give, oh actually I gave that thing the wrong follow order. Oh, and you see right there they bumped into each other because they don't have a whole lot of know-how for avoiding that. And it's actually making it kind of difficult to figure out which one is going where. Okay, no, I've got it right. So you will have to monitor things as you initially set up the formation, because as you saw just there, they will try and like defy formation orders and make their own formation. And they'll try to go back to the sort of like default following, and you don't really want that. If you're going to set things up like this, you want to make sure that they are properly following each other in the order that you want. So what I want to see here, oh, actually I ordered you in too early. So what I want to see here is this sort of thing. So what we do is we use the 4 CWIS to give them really, really good anti-air cover, right? Nope. And then we babysit them to make sure that they actually do what we want them to do. And now this other carrier missile needlefish should settle in right here in line, and once these other two can figure out where they're going and not actually, bump into and damage each other repeatedly, you will see them form the formation that we're looking for. And I prefer doing something like this over having them just be like, okay, this is the lead, and then back left, back right, all out in, this long sort of V formation. I prefer doing something like this. And you can get creative with this. You can, you know, also have it set up to where, like I could give these the follow order here, and they would sort of swing out wider. So like here, just as a demonstration. Once you have them set up, these are also now their own squads, so I could order this one off, and these two that are attached to it will stick to it. So it can be helpful for doing that sort of thing. But just as another example, let's say that we want a different formation, and we want to keep the guns all together. It's quite the impressive ballet that they dance out there. So let's say that we want to do things this way. So we're going to wait until these other two recognize their order and get into formation. Once the lines start blinking, we know they're good to go, or, you know, it turns into the dotted lines. Okay. So now we have a slightly different formation. And you can get creative with this stuff, and depending on the numbers of ships that you can afford to create and how you want your setup to be, you can do stuff like this. So now what I've done here is I've got it to where the entire fleet still has very good sea whiz coverage, and then I've got a leading unit. I've got the two that need to be most protected in the center, and then I've got 3 160mm guns. And now, if you wanted, because these things are much more fuel efficient these days, I could go ahead and send these things in, because I know that Magma no longer has units to defend it, naval units to defend it, or air units, actually, and I could send the Albatross, and have the Albatross, you know, raise altitude and prepare to be their scout, and then the Albatross combined with the fleet's power would be able to very easily take the entire island and just down everything. It's going to use a lot of 160mm ammo and a lot of carrier cruise missiles, but this is the kind of thing that you would do sort of like in an endgame scenario, or if you know, wanted to just kind of have that power fantasy of having the fleet move and do things for you. And then once they've finished taking out everything on the island, I could just send in the virus bots on a you know, petrol airlift, and the entire time the carrier could be attacking a completely different island, such as one of these others nearby. You know, so like for example, if Magma did still have naval units, then what I would do is I would send the fleet out to somewhere like Obsidian, because a 2-shield island would be much more appropriate for the fleet to handle. And then I would use the main carrier to take Magma, and you can perform remote operations like that. That can give you the excuse to run a game with more players rather than just 1 or 2, so that you have somebody who's, you know, you have like a team that's constantly in charge of handling the remote operations with the fleet, and then you have a team that is working with the carrier. And so that's pretty much everything in terms of, you know, issuing advanced orders, all of the different armaments that you have, everything at your disposal, how to do pretty much everything with the carrier. I think between this video and the last one, there isn't a single thing that I haven't covered. If you can think of anything that I didn't go over, or if you have any other questions, once again, all of my information is going to be down in the description, so you can send me a DM through like Discord. You can leave a comment here, and you can also check out the guide that I wrote for Steam if reading through something like that would be more helpful to you, or faster to reference, because this is over an hour again. Very complicated game. I fully recognize that's part of the reason why I'm making the videos, try to help people out. So I think from here, the next thing we'll be doing, the next time you see me, I will have a challenge run set up so that I can, you know, do something a bit more interesting, or at least something that I think is a bit more interesting. We'll see. Maybe some of the carrier command community will like watching me suffer as I attempt to take, you know, finish a campaign with 4 enemy AI teams using only ground units in the carrier, instead of constantly spamming everything with rockets and, you know, doing all the stuff that I would normally do. So we'll see. Actually, that's one more thing. You'll notice here pretty shortly that if I order these things too close, they will make their own attempts to avoid islands, and they'll plot their own course around islands, and they will refuse to get within a certain range so that they do not beach themselves. Pretty helpful, that. But that should be everything. You know, let me know if you have any questions. Good luck with your campaigns, and hopefully we all get to see this game's full potential someday. I hope the developers don't end up abandoning it, because, you know, there's a lot of potential here, and it's a fantastic experience. There's a lot to be said for something, you know, so simple in its, you know, in its concept, really. Being able to just, you know, okay, I can just order a couple of units around. This is no like RTS with hundreds of units, where you can take direct control of something. This is a concept that we're going to be seeing in games more often. There's a couple of games that have been announced that let you do a similar thing, taking control of your units in an RTS-like scenario, all that sort of stuff. So we'll see where it goes, and hopefully it's only up from here. But I'll catch you guys next time.